This video was made possible by the Eliason Group, an Agile consulting service. You can locate the video under Follow Us, then select Recent Videos on YouTube on the agilenewengland.org website.
Good night, or and I'm out of here. Good evening. I am really excited to be here tonight. And I thought before I get started, I would just tell you a little bit about myself. I guess as a starter, how many of you have heard of Broad Institute? Okay, how many haven't? I hadn't until about 3 years ago when I got a call from a recruiter. And got really excited once I learned more about it. So I've been at Broad for about 3 years. I joined Human Resources. I'm relatively new to Human Resources, and I head up a function called People Analytics. Within Broad, we call it People Insights. This is an emerging field that's so new that when I got the call, I was working at Brigham and Women's at the time, I had to Google People Analytics because I hadn't heard what it was. And then when I looked at it, I was like, oh, I can do that. So 3 years in, we have a great story to tell about a lot of the work that we're doing across Broad, but particularly about providing information to our Agile software engineers so that they can be doing amazing things. And I want to introduce my colleague who was kind enough to come tonight, Didi Vaz. Didi is one of our Agile coaches, and she is always, within People Analytics, a lot of what we do are trying to find useful data about our people to make the work environment as great as possible so that they can be as great as possible in the Agile teams. Didi is always my connection on the Agile team of when I have an idea or she has an idea and we start to get excited, we tend to build these things together. And DSP, the data science platform group I'll be talking about tonight, they tend to be my prototype for the rest of Broad. So I am here because Didi works at the Broad, and I'm so thankful for that. And at different times tonight, she'll just be jumping in, because when you start asking more technical questions, I'm going to look at her. Because I can explain Agile, but I am not a software engineer. A little bit about myself in terms of my background. I talked about how I had to look up what People Analytics was. I'm a management consultant by training. I did a lot of work around strategy, execution, and balanced scorecard. Was really interested in how do you, once you know what your strategy is, how do you actually implement it? And how do you measure it along the way so that you've got an indicator of whether you're on track or off track? I don't like to wait until the end to find out. For instance, I don't want to wait until the end of my retirement to find out that I saved enough money. So there's probably some indicators along the way. And so the way I look at the world is like that. And then along the way with that, with management consulting, I've ended up doing a lot of change management, was naturally interested in the people, was naturally interested in when things go awry, it tends to be because of the people, because we didn't involve people or we didn't ask them enough, or when I worked in banking or when I worked in healthcare, I always said, the floor knows the answer. Like, you've got to go to the people who are doing the work. So I've been involved in a lot in change management, and then also I ended up being a lot involved in IT implementations because probably about 10 years ago, a lot of companies started figuring out if we're going to have a really successful IT implementation, we better make sure that people are on board. And that's where I was introduced to Agile software engineering. I was on teams that were using that methodology, and they explained it so many times that I can now explain the difference between that and the Cascade methodology for software development. So it worked out well when I ended up at Broad doing People Analytics. In terms of what gets me out of bed in the morning and why I love working at the Broad, people are a puzzle, and I love solving that puzzle, and I love doing innovative work, and I love doing good. So if I can help make the work environment better for the people who work there, and it helps us accomplish what we're trying to achieve, that's awesome. Because how many of us have been in jobs where you're like, when is this day going to be over? And life is too short. And so if I'm able to help make that a more pleasant day, and we're actually able to accomplish our strategy, how great is that? So a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Introduction to the Broad, for those who haven't heard it before. A little bit about HR People Analytics, the group that I run. A lot about measuring team effectiveness in Agile teams. And I thought, you know, I talked to Richard before I gave this presentation, and he said this group loves to have something to walk away with. So we're actually going to do breakout exercises on this thing called Team Climate Inventory. I'm going to be showing you how we do it at Broad. I have also done this kind of work when I was at Brigham and Women's and other places, have always measured team effectiveness. So when you leave tonight, you will have a tool on how to measure team effectiveness that you'll know how to implement and facilitate if you want to, or if you want to give that to someone else. So hopefully that's a good get for your evening. Talk a little bit about other ways we support Agile teams at Broad, and then, you know, any kind of questions and answers. That sound good? So a little bit about Broad. Broad is amazing. We are located right in Kendall Square. Has anyone ever heard of CRISPR or human genome? Those are some of the things that Broad has been incredibly involved in. But basically, it started as an experiment in 2004, and it was really, you know, the purpose of Broad is really to improve human health by using genomics to advance our understanding of the biology and treatment of human disease. And it's an experiment. It's a new way of doing science. The massive scientific discoveries are no longer going to happen just at the bench with a sole scientist. It's not going to be one person who's discovering, you know, penicillin, but rather people from all over the world or people from multiple institutions. And so Broad was created as a way to pull in those different resources. So you can be a Broadie and not be a Broad employee. We partner very closely with Harvard hospitals, with MIT, with Harvard, you know, all the Mass General, Brigham and Women's, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. We also partner with countries. What are some countries that always pop up in terms of, like, we're looking at their genetic? UK Biobank, Greenland. I know we're doing things with the whole country, Finland. We are able to bring in all those resources and work with everyone, and the whole idea is that what we discover gets shared broadly so other scientists can then build on that. Because the only way we're going to be able to cure massive human disease like this is if we open it. So it's really different. So the Broad community has about 4,000 members. About 1,300 people are employees. As someone in people analytics, I get asked often to do things like measure employee engagement. I can't measure employee engagement. I have to measure Broadie engagement. Imagine trying to get people who don't work for your organization to complete a survey. I have a pretty good hit record, but it's very challenging. If I ever go back to our executive leadership team and say, well, we're really focused on the employee population, they'll say, but that's not all of us. And also, we're a lot more than just scientists. We have physicians, biologists, chemists, computer scientists, engineers, and then administrative staff, such as myself. We actually have a massive software engineering arm at the Broad. It's almost like having its own technology company within the Broad that's been built in the last few years. And I think the best way to describe what we do is to let Broadies describe it. So I'm going to show you a little video.
I started off making video games once upon a time. Then I had a ginormous quarter-life crisis and went, oh no, where's the meaning in my work?
I've been in software for a little while. I started in QA and then I was in management and team building roles. I remember at my first lecture, I just felt like, wow, this is this would be the coolest place to work.
If you're excited to sort of work hard and learn new things, if you're excited to just be a big part of science, I feel like this is the right place to be.
Everyone I talked to said, if you're in Boston, the only place you should work is the Broad.
If you're interested in genomic discovery, the Broad really is the only place to be.
It feels better to be working on something that feels meaningful.
I get to like meet new people and then get to casually say I help cure cancer for work, which is just like this mic drop in any party, and then no one speaks to me again.
It's a nonprofit trying to solve the world's diseases. If that doesn't sell you on it as a starting point, I don't know, there's something wrong.
There aren't a lot of frontiers left, and this is one of them that is vast and really, really important.
It is kind of like intimidating where you go, oh wow, like these are people who do big, big things. And then you go, they're working with the software that I write. I better make that good.
We just called 20,000 genomes, which is pretty cool. And we're going to do 65,000 genomes. And you can't go and look and say, well, what did this other company do? Because no one else has done it.
So all of that enormous torrent of data now has to be computed somewhere. And so we're trying to make that easier.
We take software review really seriously in our group. Everything you write is reviewed by at least one other person. And it's a great way to get much better at writing code.
There are people who've been here for years and brand new people, and they seem to really value growth in a lot of different ways.
I started off doing bench research at the Broad in one of our clinical labs. I took some coding classes and kind of like started moving towards that direction. And then like before I knew it, I feel like I was swallowed up by the engineering team.
I've worked in environments that are like just work hard, do late nights and pull weekends. Here, despite the fact that our mission is like way more important, it's so much more casual and everybody is much more kind of grounded and down to earth about things.
It's just really encouraging when your boss comes to say like, how are you doing? Do you like the projects you're working on? How are things at home? And you're like, awesome, thank you for asking.
I think everyone's aware of how important all of this is, but there's also a nice balance with the rest of life. Having a drop-in meditation class and yoga and boot camp, like all these other things just happening, and it's just nice to be able to have so many different kinds of resources.
The work is really interesting. The people are really great. Everyone is friendly, everyone is really smart, everyone is really excited about what they're doing.
This is a place to go and do work that is meaningful, and you are actually changing the world by enabling science to happen. And the fact that I can do that with the skills that I have without like a lab coat or a PhD is amazing, and I love it.
So that's a little bit about the Broad and what our software engineers are doing at the Broad. So how many people here work in like the Kendall Square area? And used to, commute wasn't great, few, okay. This is just a map of Kendall Square, and this is kind of what keeps me up at night as someone in human resources and looking at data analytics and want to make sure that our people want to keep working at the Broad, is that there are 26 major biotech, pharmaceutical, and tech companies within a half-mile of the Broad. And those are the major ones. Within the Facebook building itself, my analyst, when I had her do this, said that there were also 4 other startups. So our people can go anywhere. And we want to make sure that they stay with us. And this just shows the group I'm going to be talking about today is our data science platform. And I'm going to make sure I'm not in the dead space.
Yeah.
Okay. Doing all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Anyway, what I wanted to show is starting in 2016 to now, this is what the growth has been within the data science platform. This is a lot of people. I removed the numbers. And this has been our retention rate. And what we've learned that's critical is we need to make sure that this is a great environment where our Agile software teams can be doing great things. Because not only do we need to hire a lot of people because we're growing, but we need to keep the people who we've found. And just to hit on this again, they have a lot of other places that they could just walk across the street. So this is a little bit of the story about, you know, how we do this. And also I'm just thinking, I mean, how many of you in the last month have gotten a call from a headhunter? In the last week? I kind of track how is my career doing based on how many calls I get. And I'm sure everyone in the data science platform, as well as you, are doing that. You want to make sure that you're happy where you are, because thank God you could go somewhere else. So this just kind of gives the backdrop on this. The People Insights group I run, so a lot of companies, HR, they'd call this their People Analytics team. We call it People Insights. Our job is to basically come up with insights that help our leaders and employees. And the mission of my group is to improve our ability to position people and teams for success through better use of data and analytics. In some organizations, people analytics can really be big brother watching in a massive creepy way. I am personally committed to making sure we are not, my team are all women, big sister watching in a big creepy way. So a lot of the information that we get, we always have to look at and ask ourselves, is this giving us information that is going to enhance a team or enhance an individual? And if it's not, that's not a project that we take on. The other thing is, as our group is getting more sophisticated, we are doing a lot talking within the Broad community about how we use data and to make sure that they can always also opt out. We actually, with a lot of our projects, go through this thing called an IRB process, which is what we would need to do if we were doing a research project using human subjects. So I just want to make extremely clear, people analytics is a fascinating area. It can also be incredibly creepy, and my goal in life is to make sure that I am not doing anything that's creepy. And my team also tries not to be creepy. So in terms of the data science platform team, as well as other groups that I work with, there's really three big things that we've worked, again, I mentioned Dee Dee very closely with. One is on team effectiveness for data science group. Another is on peer-to-peer feedback. Since they're in agile teams, there technically is no leader of that team. Are they giving each other feedback on a regular basis? And then the third is just employee engagement. How are they doing? Do they feel like they have growth opportunities, career opportunities, work-life balance? Those kind of things that we're always monitoring that information, and we're always sharing that information back with the team. My feeling is it's their data, it's their information, to use that to be able to then run their agile teams. So even on the way here, Dee Dee and I were in traffic for about an hour, and we were going through the engagement data she just got for her group and talking about the conversations she's having with the different teams. And it's interesting to me as the person who produces it to find out how it gets used. I'm pleased to report Dee Dee uses it for good. Also not creepy. The biggest, the thing I'm really going to be focusing on tonight is the team effectiveness. Yeah, and really the story behind the team effectiveness is when I came 3 years ago, the DSP group had just turned to agile teams, and my boss, the chief people officer, said, as a first thing, can you see if there's any way that you could support them? And what I immediately thought was, well, if you've just moved to self-managed teams, it would be really great to get some data to find out how are you doing managing your teams and giving that information to them. And how do you make that in a way that people can easily talk about? So my hypothesis, just before I came to Broad, I had just finished a master's in organizational effectiveness, and had gotten really into team effectiveness. That was the basis of my master's thesis, and spent about 3 years at Brigham and Women Primary Care, working with them, measuring team effectiveness within the primary care practices. So you think about when you go to a doctor's appointment, how effectively was the front desk working with the medical assistants, working with the physicians. My hypothesis was that if those teams could work effectively together, they'd be able to provide better care for their patients. Being able to measure that for 3 years, it turns out that was true. We were able to show the link. Teams that had higher team effectiveness scores also provided better care. And we knew that based on things like medical outcomes. So, so I took the same concept here and thought, okay, if you have these self-managed software teams, if we could provide them the data, could they make adjustments so that they could thrive? So I pitched this idea to the data science platform, and this is one of the reasons I just love this team. I did some peer-reviewed research. I love research. I want to know what we're doing is not some exciting thing you read in Fast Company, but I want to know, does this work? Am I asking questions that are valid and reliable? Is it measuring what we think it's going to be measuring? And I didn't want to just use the survey that I had used at the Brigham. It probably could have worked just fine, but that one had been proven to work more for medical teams. So I did some research to find out, were there any surveys that worked in Agile software development? And this particular tool that I use, the Team Climate Inventory, well published, this has actually been proven to work in Agile software development teams. Also tends to work in more innovative teams. And I've actually used it with my team to measure our team processes and how we're working. But the great thing about the engineers is when I talked to them about this and I told them how this works for Agile teams, a whole bunch of them leaned forward and were like, you researched us? You wanted to understand us? And so it was just the act of bothering to understand the environment that they worked in that they were all game for doing this. And basically it measures 4 components: task orientation, team vision, support for innovation, and participatory safety, which is incredibly important in an Agile team that you trust and can communicate with one another. So when you just look at these 4 categories and think about teams you've been on that have just gone awry, you can probably choose at least one of these buckets where something stopped working really great in terms of how the team was communicating and working together. So real simply, and on purpose, you can't read too many details other than seeing the color. There's a bunch of reasons that I liked the Team Climate Inventory. One is that it was short. It was based on 14 statements. And the kind of questions were things like, we have a we are in it together attitude, we cooperate in order to help develop and apply new ideas, we share information throughout the team. So there are 14 statements that get to that process and methodology of how they're working together. The answers are really simple. It's on a 1 to 4 on a 1 to 4 scale. 1 being I strongly disagree with that statement, I made that red. 2, disagree, that's yellow. 3, agree is green. 4, agree is dark green. I tried to marry it to traffic lights so it intuitively made sense when I looked at it. I needed a 4th color, so I went from green to dark green. And then the other thing about this survey that I like is it's easy to debrief. So what I'll be sharing with everyone today is nitty-gritty, what are the questions and how would you run something like this if you wanted to do this with your team. It works on teams as small as 3, it works on teams as large as 30. And it's pretty easy just to do, SurveyMonkey, you put the questions in, they answer, smack it into Excel, and you can easily create a similar graph. And I just want to give you a chance. When I was at the Brigham, I often called these, they're kind of like MRI brain scans on the health of the team. So without even knowing the colors and just knowing red, yellow, and green, what that means, I'm showing you a bunch of other ones that we had so you can see how they can really vary. So this is another team, more yellow, more red, more green, dark green. And so what I got to the point with teams is that I can just look at these and real quick know how are they doing. Where should we be honing in more? So I really like to learn exponentially. I'm not a great listener, which is also why I like to have the mic. So what I'm going to do is actually have us get into a breakout exercise pretty quickly. And Dee Dee, if I could ask for your help, I made 80 copies of, so we might have more than 80 people, so if you could just share with your neighbor, of a sample Team Climate Inventory result. And the idea again is this exercise is designed, if you want to implement this with your team right away, you could do this tomorrow. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is get in teams of about 6 people. So make sure it's 6 people kind of sitting near each other. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Make sure at least a few people have this sheet. And because we always forget to do this, when you get in your group, introduce yourself to who's in your team. And I'll give you a few minutes. So I'm just curious, as you were looking at this, what kind of stuff struck you? What did you notice? What did you wonder about? Dee Dee's group?
We noticed that for 50% of these issues, they fell between 50% issues fell between the 25 and 50% quartile in terms of, we put marks down on the 25th, on the quarterly, on the quarter percentile and the 50% percent response here. And what we noticed was that between the 25th and 50% quartile, half these teams showed up as having issues. Half of these were issues for the team. So 50% of this was an issue for the team. So clearly, this is a team that is not yet gelled.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the overall visual cortex view
Yep.
of these. Anybody else on the team have an opportunity?
Any other groups? Anything that struck you? We've got a hand back here.
We seem to notice that where they were most in agreement was when it came to the team mission. Like they seemed to be pretty okay with the team objective, the team mission. It was more about like, am I feeling heard on the team that seemed to be where the disagrees came in.
Yep. Seems true. Yes?
Yeah, they seem to be generally good with sharing team information, but we thought it was very, it stood out that the team objectives weren't clearly understood. And, you know, that was like the second biggest red. But there's other huge yellow where team members are prepared to question the basis of what the team is doing. And, you know, there's a couple of different things that could cause that. One of them would be a culture where you're not allowed to bring up problems unless you've already got solutions. Or I guess more to the point, I forget that was a different one. So, like, that they're great at talking about, like, more static information. But when it comes down to the current status of things, they might have issues talking on a more immediate basis.
Yep. I'm curious, because you, with that, we're starting to get into, you know, why it might be. Like you could see what the results were. I'm curious, other groups, did you start speculating on why certain scores might look the way they are? Yeah.
So just looking at a pattern, right? A couple of questions that struck me is the team taking time to come up with, develop new ideas?
Yep.
Contrasting that with people are informed about work-related issues in the team and the objectives clearly understood. So perhaps the population feels that all the best ideas are kind of with a few. There is some sense of internal, you know, SME control, I don't know.
Yep.
So that's getting more directed, so it's not, everyone's not giving or equal importance to come up with ideas and getting implemented. Somewhere I think there is a focus on someone trying to be a hero, if you will.
Yep, yep. So kind of a speculation on what you think might be going on. And then, sir, you had a comment?
Yeah, I had a comment on the second one also, but I felt a little differently. I thought that maybe the team's not been given enough time. So it's a team that's in a forming state. It's not really in a performing yet. So what's happening is that probably they're not giving enough time because they're certainly having some issues where things are not getting discussed. So I'm not sure whether it's just personal, where somebody's trying to be heroizing it, or it's just they have not been given time there to sense down.
Yeah.
A little bit into the implementation details that are lost there.
So, in going through this is kind of the takeaway I wanted you to have from this part is just, we know what the results are, but we don't know why they're the results. And the important thing is this information needs to go back to the team because ultimately they're the ones who understand why the result is. But our next step as the facilitators, now that we've looked at this and thought, this is interesting, kind of curious, for us to think about how would we get the groups to start talking about this in a way that's productive. So take 1 minute for your team, and I'm going to ask you, pick out the 2 or 3 questions you'd want to dig in more deeply during your debrief with the team who took the survey, and then I'll just ask you what you guys chose and why. Okay, so I'm going to bring the group back. I never learned of this before. I have a 1- and 4-year-old at home, and tomorrow morning, people, we are done watching Daniel Tiger. We are going to daycare. Anyway, so actually this group just asked me some questions that I want to take a step back and get to before I ask you what questions did you want to talk more deeply when you debrief with the group. So one of the questions was, what do some of these questions actually mean? Was that correct? That particular one. So something I want to say about this survey, which I can answer in general about, I'm not going to be able to answer that, about the survey questions. So the reason I say that I do peer-reviewed research and I find survey tools that are already out there, I try to find, and this is one of them, I find survey tools that are valid and reliable. And what that means is they have been thoroughly tested so that in terms of validity, the question is interpreted more or less the same by large populations, and the reliability is, if you were to survey me today or 4 days from now and I'm having a bad day, my answers don't divvy that much. So I can't answer your specific question of what that means because I didn't develop the tool. And it's the kind of thing that I find, I always will have some groups who'll say, okay, but what does that specifically mean? What I would say is, when you get together with the group and you debrief on the results, if there are questions that people are saying, what does that mean? Spend a few minutes to say, how did you interpret it? What I have found is usually most groups, they're close enough that they interpreted it close enough that you're looking for a gist of how you're doing on this. And that's why I don't develop my own survey questions and I get ones that are already out there. And then someone else asked how large this team was. I think I said 20 people. I made that up. The survey tool works on teams of 3 to 30, so if you want to think about an Agile team, there's got to be, Dee an optimal size. Is it 8?
5 to 7.
Okay, this team is 5 to 7. The results don't really divvy that much. Okay, so the question I'd ask you guys to do is, what are, if you were to debrief with your team, you're not going to have time to debrief on every single question, so what are the few that you'd want the group to talk about? Yes?
Question, it seems like, are you getting it done? It seems like things are getting partway done and then go off and do something else seems to be what we're seeing based on the questions. So I want to ask, do you think you're getting it done with what you're working on?
Oh, the question you were going to ask the team?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I didn't word this well. What I meant was, of the statements or questions on the survey, which ones do you want to choose that you would debrief in more depth with the team? Yes?
Probably the ones that have the most red, because that indicates some issues that one wants to understand.
Some discord. Did anyone have some, it's a good choice, did anyone have some other, yes sir?
I think I'll probably put both red and green, kind of get a team more comfortable and tell me what they're doing right, what they can kind of do better.
Yeah.
It's probably the one that has all 4, in there. So that tells you that the team has the most amount of disagreement because you get both.
You've got the rainbow.
That, yeah.
Yep. There are 2 more back there, I think. Oh, I'm sorry.
We talked about looking at both ends of the spectrum and not necessarily being negatively focused, because you need to take a look at what is going on in the positive vein as well, and balance out how you're looking at the analysis.
Yep. Can I just say, to have a group that's like willing to participate like this, I just cannot thank you enough. This is like lovely.
I would actually look at, is it one person who answered disagreement for all the questions, or is it multiple people? If it's one person who's doing strongly disagree for everything, but the problem is with the person.
Yep. So, okay, so a few things on everything everyone's suggesting. Number one, I always have someone in the group who's like, is it the same person? And what I always say with these surveys is, I tend to use SurveyMonkey, and I tend to send it out. I want to make sure everyone fills it out, so I tell them it's confidential but not anonymous. I can see it. And I do that just to make sure I can keep nagging people till they fill it out. Thank God I've done that, because what I can tell you is I have never seen an instance where the red is the same person. But when I'm working with a group, I won't go back and tell them who said what. But I've probably done this like 50 times, and it's never actually happened. Oh, of course.
So we were kind of talking, what stage are they in forming or in storming, or where is this group that the survey was taken?
This particular group this was another group. Our data science platform scores were so high that I didn't use any of them as an example, quite frankly. It's another group at Broad who has been in existence for about 8 years. Yeah.
I think this is fantastic to show the outliers and to see what's negative and positive. But basically in Agile, it's basically what's continuous improvement. Okay, so what I would do is take those 5 long yellow ones and find out why they're yellow. The 5 yellow ones also have the most red. And I would say, okay,
yeah.
What's the bottom line here? The green, everything's acceptable to have the green, and especially the dark green. Well, why do the teams actually have those long yellows and the reds?
So I'm going to actually move us to the next step. You've set that up really well. So I asked you what questions that you would choose. This is what I have learned. I like choosing what I call rainbow questions because it means typically that's where you have the most amount of disagreement. What I have learned over the years is it does not matter what question you choose. So a lot of times, because the same conversation comes out, and so as a recovering management consultant, what I often do, and Dee Dee saw me do this when we did her results, I said, which questions are you most passionate about that you know your group would want to talk about? Because that gives them agency. It's not someone from HR coming in telling them what they're going to talk about. Because I know the conversation ends up being the same. So the question is, how do you have that conversation so that it's productive? And so the next thing, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. What questions would you ask this team? You know, you'd give them these results. You've chosen the few questions you're going to have them talk in more depth, you know, just a few on this. What questions would you ask them to get them thinking about what these scores mean and what they want to do? Does that make sense? Okay. So I am curious, what questions did people come up that they'd use as a facilitator to get the conversation started? There's a hand in the back. Are you surprised with your results? That's a good question. All right, so just are you surprised with your results, kind of see what they react. Like that? Yes, sir.
Which questions were toughest to answer?
Or if we have one particular question that we're looking at, like in this team, we take the time needed to develop new ideas. The team seems to think that we're not spending enough time on that. Why not? And then just do the 5 whys. Like keep going down, you know, first ask a why question, then another why question, and see if you can get to the bottom of why we don't have enough time.
So you're really using a technique you know from Agile with the 5 whys that works.
Yeah, 5 whys.
Yes.
We came up with another Agile technique we use called the perfection game, which is basically, in this case, you apply it, assuming the group had already picked what they think is the important question. You say, let's talk about, for each of you, what would it take to move your answer one step better? So tell us what it would take to go from, if you were red, what would make you go to yellow? If you were yellow, what would it take to go to green? If you were green, what would it take to go to dark? And then everybody, gives everybody a chance to participate no matter where they were on the scale.
Which would be great. Oh, I love that.
I would ask them to say which questions are more important or less important before I showed them the results.
Okay, so you just show them the questions again.
Show them the questions again, ask them what's more or less important before they've seen the results, because you don't want their judgments of importance to be skewed by looking at the results.
Okay. So kind of get a group consensus on where to focus initially. Any other ideas? So I purposely posed this question to you all because I had a feeling you would have new techniques for me that I can then go use. Because I've said I'm very familiar with Agile. I'm actually Lean certified. But with Lean, we never got past doing 5S at the Brigham. And so we have all these office, all of the exam rooms were all perfectly organized for 5S, but we never got past that. So this is great to learn these additional techniques. So this is the question I always ask that I think of as the magic question, but quite honestly, a lot of the other questions you all asked, and even the opening of like, what did you think? What did you notice? I tend to do that, but I hadn't thought of that, so it's great. What I always ask the group is, in order to get more green and dark green for this question as a group, what should we start, stop, and keep doing? So this is the one I like, but having said that, and Dee Dee can talk to this, we did this, the TCI, the data science team found this valuable enough when we did it that they wanted to do it again in 6 months. And I found my facilitation 6 months later was kind of stale because maybe some of these other I love the what would it take to get one step further, because one of the things with some of our teams is they went from like having some yellow to being green and really dark green. And so that's a technique that could have made it go a little further. So we did this twice, and then we moved on to some other tools because it wasn't super fresh for me. And I don't know, Dee Dee, if you have anything you noticed when we did those debriefs, just to totally put you on the spot.
No, I think I liked, I think what worked was actually asking the team which questions to pick. I recall that, it was a while ago. Like you mentioned, we've moved on to other tools. But this was really great to see improvement along the way. For the team to really own the process of that debrief, to have them pick the questions was great.
Yeah.
That answers your question.
I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are also some other things that I noticed about this process, and I found it at the Brigham when I did it in the primary care practices, and then different tool but same concept with the engineers and some other groups at Broad, is just by having this debrief, things start to happen. People start doing things differently. So I purposely in both cases was coming in as kind of an internal consultant, and I'm always conscious when I'm wearing my HR hat. Because I'm not from HR, I remember it's like, oh man, the HR people. So I did not want to show up and say, and what's the next task? And what are the things that you're going to do? I really wanted to give them this tool as a way to talk about it within their group and decide what they want to do. So I didn't come in and then say, okay, based on this debrief with this question, what's your action plan? I found that groups tended to then, have the dots and they'd vote on the things that were most important, or they just start going to do some things differently. And the other thing I noticed with Dee Dee's teams is in groups, even groups that had a lot of green, they started going back to Agile principles and realizing we're not actually practicing this as much as we said we could be. We really need to be doing X, Y, or Z more frequently. Or groups that, when we went and tested it again, their scores were really dark green. Across the board. They were just going back to the basics of the Agile principles. They had the skills, they had the toolkits, and it was a reminder to start using them. And without even me being able to explain what all those tools are, they just started doing them. So it seems to be a tool that works really well with Agile groups to remind them of toolkits that they have. And my other thought for going through this, if this is the kind of thing that you think would be helpful in your team, you have the skills to do the debrief, which you've obviously shown with the kind of questions you came. And if you didn't have it, magic questions there, and that one always works. And I don't know, did you notice anything particular?
I noticed some folks noticing this too, that clearly sometimes these things show us that there are interpersonal things going on in the team. And so that can get a little bit touchy, but I think some of these questions, the way they're phrased, can kind of get at the heart of what's going on there. So, for example, we are in it together attitude. Maybe you throw that up on a board if that's really a rainbow colored response, and you say, hey, in the last 6 months or since the last time we've taken this, what are the things we've done to show that we have been in it together? Because there's some green there. What are some of the things we've done that don't demonstrate we're in it together? And then you look at that and pull some actions from it. So
Yep.
I think this is a really great way to have a team look right at their interpersonal, like to really face it, like, hey, we're not gelling as a team, which can be a kind of a touchy thing to approach as a facilitator, but you have this data to kind of back it up that it has to be discussed.
Just curious, did you conduct this survey along with the Gallup engagement survey? Did you guys do it together? Did you work it together?
Our employee engagement survey that we do? No, there's a bit of an evolution with that. We don't do the Gallup survey. We use a tool called Glint. We do an employee pulse about 3 times a year. It's about 10 questions. I started out, I think I had just gotten to the Broad, and this was like a no-brainer, and so just trying to establish myself, we did this within DSP. That's what built the credibility for groups to let me then pilot employee engagement surveys. And we've actually, at this point, we don't do this anymore. I do it sometimes in groups, or I've taught the HR business partners how to do it with groups. You know, we haven't found a huge need after the first 2 times because we get data in other ways within DSP now, which I was going to talk a little bit about. Yeah.
To know what Dee said is, I think what the groups need to do is maybe take ownership for a month or 2 and get back. And then, like, you know, after that, take ownership and find out how they did some of those things.
Yeah.
And then review that. How did we be all green after those people are taking ownership, those teams are taking ownership?
Well, and we found, you know, we did it the first time, and then when we did it the second time, a lot of scores went up. And even in groups, there was one team in particular, the person who kind of spearheaded it has a background in improv, and I think it made a difference. But they were all green. They were the most passionate group talking about not what they had done well, but what more they should do. And I was like, huh, I would have kind of sat back and given myself an applause. But that, yeah, they definitely took the ownership for that.
And once you take the ownership, then you can see the transparency within the group to see how the group is actually doing.
Yeah,
right?
Agree. Yeah.
So I know some of the questions that we're talking about asking or digging into are looking at what team responses are to one question at a time. How do we move this one this way? How do we mediate something that looks bad on this? What our group was looking at was perhaps, there are 2 questions, the last 2 questions centered around objectives. And it actually seemed like some of the answers might be contradictory within the team. So for instance, the last question, it's kind of green and just a little bit of yellow that says, I'm in agreement with our team objectives. So everyone's in agreement with team objectives. But the question just before that has this pretty hefty red thing where our team objectives are clearly understood by other members of the team. So you've got this funny contradiction going on where everyone thinks that everyone understands the objectives, but then they think other people on the team don't. So I'm wondering if there's any strategy that you've used in order to kind of dig into perhaps team perception of each other.
Well, I have found instances where people start debating the meaning of the question, you know, because they'll find that, and that's when I have them take a few minutes to say, what do you think this question means? And just by talking about that for a few minutes, I find it doesn't end up being that much of an issue. It ends up, and usually someone will say, I said this because, and it'll be some very particular thing. So I haven't found it to be that much of an issue. Yeah, yeah. And I said the questions are valid and reliable. It doesn't mean there doesn't still have to be a conversation sometimes, but it doesn't seem to stop the debrief and them from moving forward. Yeah.
So as I take a look at, this is the TCI, right?
Yes.
And so I haven't worked specifically with something like this, but I think we've all probably engaged with Agile maturity surveys and things like that. And so from a product delivery perspective, we focus a lot on outcomes. And so are the teams delivering the outcomes that we wanted to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start bringing in these kind of metrics, be it Agile maturity, strength of a product owner or your backlog, and you start looking at these sorts of questions, do you have data that correlates, that says we should focus on getting more green and our velocities go up? Or
right.
So did you have that?
No, I was saying right, like I'm listening to you.
Because right would have been a good answer.
Yeah. No, if you're asking, so can you show the link between this and productivity in general, or outcome?
Something, happiness, which maybe leads to better outcomes, increased velocity maybe, because just working on these doesn't necessarily, it'd be nice that it ties to an outcome that makes the team better, stronger, more productive.
Yep.
In spending time on this without that, maybe it's the wrong area, I guess I would say.
So, so my original research with my master's thesis, what I wanted to do was get all this team data, because my belief was if I could get all this team and have a functional team, I could directly correlate it to medical outcomes, or here, I could directly correlate it to, output or productivity or that kind of thing. And immediately the person who heads up DSP said, hey, this is all great, but how are we doing in terms of being productive, that kind of thing. So I went back and did more research to find out, are there any tools that have done that for sure? What I learned is that there is not peer-reviewed journal research yet on this, and so I like to copy and improve it where I am. I'm not an innovator in that, sense. So it's an area of research that I would love to be able to make the connection between these things. Unfortunately, I work at an organization that has a lot of data scientists, so if it's there, we're hoping to find it eventually. But I can't say I haven't proven it, and I haven't seen any proof of it yet. What I can say is, when I look at the things that really worry me, and it goes back to that retention and that head count, we've grown a tremendous amount. We're keeping the people we have. We continue to get more and more business and collaborations that want to work with us. And so, I'm looking at it from, are we able to build and keep the team we need to achieve this mission? But your exact one-for-one, I'd love to be able to do that, but haven't yet.
Okay, to your point earlier, it says for the team that's been around for 8 years.
The particular team I did it with, yeah.
So they haven't gotten fired, it doesn't do with something.
Yeah, this isn't a bad, this in itself isn't, it shows you've got areas that you need to work on and improve. I don't think you could afford to have Agile teams like this with this kind of growth, having colors like this for too long. But again, these aren't our Agile teams.
During the debrief, what, if anything, have you done to encourage enough security and comfort on the part of the team members so that they would actually be candid in their discussion?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of, I went to the group before to explain the whole concept of this, talked about the importance of participatory safety, let them know this is confidential, and the only person who knows who said what is me. I facilitated it, so it was not a self-managed. I felt like this was enough. We needed outside facilitators. Dee Dee helped. We had multiple groups we were debriefing with, so there was a facilitator at every table. And the key to asking the question I was asking is, in order to get more green, what do we need to start, stop, and keep doing? So it wasn't focused on, if you just naturally focus on what you want that future to be, naturally the things that aren't working come up, but it doesn't become a pointing session. And I can give a good example, not so much with our software engineers, because honestly, like the baseline of function, that they're a very functional group, but coming from healthcare. I can say, debriefing with some of those teams, I needed to do some hard facilitation. You know, we will be safe. People will finish what they're saying. You do not need to worry about whether you're a medical assistant or a physician.
How does the survey frequency change as a team goes from being formed to, you know, they reach the performing state?
You know, I never really did it in terms of that. I mean, when I was in primary care, I just did it twice a year to get the data points. We did it twice for this group before we moved on to some other tools that were helpful for us. I think I used it for my team. You know, we've only existed about 2.5 years. We did it at the onset and we did it after about a year. And, you know, it's a real small team. It's 3 people. But we used it as a conversation starter to talk about the kind of group that we want to be. You know, I'm leading this. I have some brilliant people on this team and I need them to come with me. So I need them to tell me when we're off track or we need to do something differently. So I think it can really kind of depend. I don't know. I know the storming, norming, forming. I've never correlated it closely to that, but it wouldn't hurt at the beginning of a group to do it just so people could be looking at. What I find is helpful is it helps people start recognizing they have a language for describing what a team is, you know, in terms of functional behaviors. I found that certainly in healthcare. So I want to be really conscious of time.
You're almost off time. Do you have any other matter to cover before we are done?
You know, I was going to talk about other ways we're supporting the Agile team. I wasn't going to go into huge depth, but, you know, I've alluded to we aren't doing this, which is also why I can entirely package it up and share it with you. But we did the team climate inventory those 2 times, and you can see this is right before we were having a huge growth spurt. Then we started doing the employee engagement pulse surveys. I do those about 3 times a year. It's about 10 questions. I get the data in real time. Those are predictors of turnover and retention. So, and I do this across Broad. I have a really good sense of where we're going to lose people, and it's an early indicator, so hopefully we can intervene in advance. I'm happy to say every time I look at DSP, I'm like, oh, we're still doing well. And then we also started something called peer-to-peer feedback events within DSP. One of the things that came out of the TCI, the group said, you know, it would be really great to be able to give each other more feedback. And so, again, I partnered with Dee. We created a survey, a few simple questions. You know, what have you done in the last 6 months to support the team? And then you wrote these questions. They were great. What were they?
What have you done? What has your teammate done in the last 6 months to enhance the team's performance? And what can they do in the next 6 months? So questions like that.
So again, really focused on Agile, team, continual improvement. The group said it was really important to them. They wanted this feedback to be just between each other. So we designed a survey, and then I ended up going out and finding there's so many great online tools. HR does not see the results. I don't need to see what they're saying to each other. But what I can track is who's giving feedback to who, so I can do a network analysis of how are we doing, you know, on feedback, because I want to know feedback is happening. And the feedback from them is that this is some of the best career feedback they've gotten in their life. It took about 3 cycles before people started getting real. We trained them. We did a lot of training on how to give and receive feedback, but it's been popular. We're actually expanding it across Broad. And so when you look at all these dots, basically I am feeling good. This group is going to keep growing. I feel like we can get the people we need. We can keep the people we have. And it's an experience so that the people in the video you saw in the beginning actually are the people who work there and are talking from their heart about what it's like to be working at the Broad. And so from a people analytics standpoint, it's awesome.